everyone, and welcome to the Science Corner. Grab your Pebbles, Sand, and Silt kit and your list of supplies. For today, we're doing Investigation 3, Part 2, Observing Sandpaper. We're going to need our science notebook and our pencil, our set of sandpaper, half a sheet of white paper, our hand lens, a pencil or crayon, which I already got that out, our bag of clean sand, and our popsicle stick. Okay, you can move your kit aside. Go ahead and open up your sandpaper. So for today, we're going to talk about why does sandpaper have the sand on it? What does the sand do for sandpaper? What do you think? Why would they put sand on sandpaper? What do people use sandpaper for? You can use it to make things smooth. It's a rough surface. So let's go ahead and open up in our science notebook to our page for today. Looking at sandpaper, what does sand do for paper? Sandpaper is our question that we're going to answer. And we're going to make a rubbing of the sandpaper. So we're going to work on answering that question as we go. We want to find out what sand does for sandpaper. What's something we could do to find that out? Well, we could try rubbing the sandpaper on something. So let's write that. If you rub sandpaper on a popsicle stick, what do you think is going to happen if we rub the sandpaper on the popsicle stick? I think it's going to wear it down because I know sandpaper is used to make things smooth. It will wear it down. I know this because sandpaper is used to make things smooth. All right. So let's observe our sandpaper first. We know we're going to need a rubbing of our sandpaper, but before we do that, let's just take a look at it. I noticed that I have 3 different kinds. This one has really, really tiny pieces of sand. This one, they're a little bit more coarse, so they're a little bit bigger, and it feels rougher on the fingers. And this one feels like there's just rocks glued onto it. So these are the biggest pieces of all. You can see how big these pieces are without even using the magnifying glass because they're so big. Okay, now we're going to make a rubbing of the sand. So we're going to take our white sheet of paper, we're going to put our sandpaper underneath it, and then we're going to take our pencil and we're lightly going to rub over where the sandpaper is to see what happens. You can see that the sandpaper is kind of showing through it. And I'm going to label it, this is coarse. Now I'm going to do my middle one. I'm going to put it next to it, and I'm going to rub this one. This one you can see that the pieces are smaller and closer together. This one is mid, M-I-D, mid. And now for our last one, our smallest piece. This one's almost completely smooth. This one's called Fine. And I'm going to do the same thing and put them into my book. So I'm going to do the coarse, the mid, And I'm going to do the fine. Okay. So how else can we observe our sandpaper? What else can we do? What would happen if we rub the sandpaper together? Let's try that. I'm going to hold it over my paper. I'm going to flip my paper over so it's white, and I'm going to hold it over my paper, and I'm going to just rub. You see there's sand coming off. It makes a loud noise. Let's try another piece. Ooh, when I rub the mid and the coarse one together, I get lots of pieces of sand that come up. Okay, let's look at the sand we just made. Oh, we can see little pieces of each one in this sand. Now I want to take a look at our clean sand. Let's take a little bit out and put it next to the sand we just made. Just a little. Okay. They look kind of the same, but also a little different. The sandpaper sand's a little bit different color than the regular sand. But I can see that in the regular sand there's different sizes. I have some big pieces, some little pieces, some medium pieces, which is the same as in my sandpaper sand. And the sand is kind of soft, and the sandpaper sand's pretty much the same. Alright, now that we've observed it, let's try rubbing it on our popsicle stick. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to rub my popsicle stick in just the sand, not the sandpaper, to see what happens. So if I rub the popsicle stick in the sand, it just kind of moves the sand out of the way, kind of like drawing. And if I feel it, it feels still the same. I don't see any wear on it. It doesn't look like it got filed down. Now let's try the coarse sandpaper. So I'm going to take the coarse sandpaper and I'm going to hold the popsicle stick so my fingers are away from the end. And I'm going to just rub the coarse sandpaper on the end of the popsicle stick to see what happens. Ooh. So when I rub the popsicle stick now, it feels kind of coarse now. Like the edge that was soft and smooth has been worn off, and now I'm left with like the underneath, which is not as soft. And I can see that there's a whole layer gone. Alright, so I did the coarse one. Now let's do the medium one. I'm going to find a different spot, so I'm going to use the other end. This one kind of did the same thing. It wore it down so that way it's not smooth anymore, but I can see the underneath part. But it's smoother than the coarse one. Now I'm going to flip my popsicle stick over and I'm going to do the fine sandpaper. Okay. Now this one feels really smooth, and I'm getting wood dust on my fingers from the sandpaper and from the wood, but this one feels really, really smooth. It feels just like the other part of it. So, the fine sandpaper made the popsicle stick smooth. I'm going to write that on my paper as a observation. The coarse sandpaper made it rough. The mid sandpaper made it not as rough. The fine sandpaper Okay, so let's compare our fine sandpaper and our coarse sandpaper. So if the fine sandpaper made it smooth and the coarse sandpaper made it rough, what's the difference between these two sandpapers? Right, the size of the rock glued onto this paper. So these are the tiny, tiny, tiniest little rocks, and these are bigger, much, much bigger rocks. So the bigger rocks made the popsicle stick more coarse, and the smaller rocks made it more smooth. So I know that bigger rocks are going to make things rough, and smaller rocks are going to make it more smooth. Okay, let's go back to our question. What does sand do for sandpaper? So what does the sand do for the sandpaper? Why does rubbing the sandpaper on the popsicle stick change the popsicle stick? Right, it's breaking it down, just like we learned about weathering with rocks, where rocks fall and they break and they knock into other rocks and break those rocks. It's weathering the wood of the popsicle stick. So what does sand do for sandpaper? It helps it weather. Because it has rocks on it. Okay, now let's go back to our hypothesis. If you rub sandpaper on a popsicle stick, it will wear it down. I know this because sandpaper is used to make things smooth. So when we rubbed the popsicle stick on with the sandpaper, did that wear it down? It did. You can see that the edge of it is not there anymore. So yes. The sandpaper wore off the outside of the popsicle stick. But only the fine one made it smooth, right? So we should add that. The fine one made it smooth. So do you think the person who invented sandpaper knew that if you glued rocks to paper, you could use it to weather things? I bet he did, because I bet he observed that there were rocks outside that were weathering other things, like rocks falling off of things that would become smaller and more weathered. And he thought he could use that to smooth other things by using the rocks to rub them down. All right, now it's time to clean up. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to take my sand, which is on my paper. I'm going to turn my paper into a hot dog bun, and I'm going to pour the sand in here. And it's okay to put the sand from the sandpaper in there too. It's not going to hurt it. Now I'm going to get my science kit. Okay, I'm going to take my sandpaper. I'm going to clip it back together, so that way I don't lose any of it. I'm going to put my pencil in, my science notebook, my paper, my popsicle stick, my magnifying glass, and my clean sand, and I'm going to get out my list of supplies. Okay, so next time we're going to do investigation for part 1, handmade soil. There's a lot of things we're going to need for this. We're going to need our science notebook, our hand lens, a vial with a cap. We're going to need a paper plate, 4 of these plastic containers. We're going to need a plastic cup, a Ziploc bag, and a spoon, potting soil, a bag of sand, gravel, pebbles, a cup with water, and a set of screen mesh, as well as some word wall words. Thanks for joining me in the Science Corner, and keep learning. I'll see you next time. Bye!